Chapter 51. Almost Boiled. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 51. Almost Boiled. Translator. Henyi Translations Editor. Henyi Translations. So much silver was handed over just like that. Naturally didn't believe this. If the prince rewarded them, there would be at least 1,000 taels. 1,000 taels. If it were her, she would have left a few hundred taels in her own hands. She would have sent some back to her family, but why did Lin Suisui give all the silver to a man? Yes, I saw it with my own eyes. Du Miao nodded. She was very sure of this. Moreover, even if Lin Suisui kept some for herself, Du Miao wouldn't reveal it now. In that case, Madame Lu is really stupid. Du Ling'er couldn't help but laugh when she heard this. She commented disdainfully, but it doesn't matter if she's stupid or not. As long as I'm capable, I'll just coax the silver from Gu Erlang. If she's stupid, wouldn't things be easier for me? Du Ling'er's words were unanimously agreed upon by the others in the Du family. Some of them even began to consider how to spend the money. However, Du Wangshe, who had always been especially concerned about money, didn't say anything. She just sat there with a frown while thinking about something. She ignored the eager discussion beside her. Others might not understand, but Du Miao wasn't stupid. From her stepmother's usual style of doing things, she could more or less guess what she was thinking at this moment. She didn't delay any longer and spoke directly. "Lo, mother, I know what you're thinking now. You're thinking that Gu Erlang doesn't have any other family and he has so much money, so it would definitely be perfect if Ling'er were to marry him. But, what nonsense are you talking about? Who wants to marry Gu Erlang? I will reject that mediocre and boring man even if he's sent to me for free. Only you find him interesting. You're so shameless that you don't care that he already has a wife. Don't think that I'm as shameless as you." Before Du Miao could finish speaking, Du Ling'er, who was sitting opposite her, stood up and threw her chopsticks at Du Miao. The scene was very chaotic. Du Ling'er was used to getting her way at home. How could she take Du Miao seriously? Seeing that the situation was about to get out of control, Du Luo quickly stood up and stopped Du Ling'er, who was about to pounce on Du Miao and hit her. After Du Luo persuaded her for a long time, she finally calmed down a little. At least, she stopped clamoring. "Don't worry. I'll still say the same thing. You picked this marriage yourself. You fancy him, but we don't take him seriously at all. Therefore, you don't have to think about all that nonsense. Ling'er has her own match. Besides, I'm still alive. It's not your turn to interfere in her marriage." Du Wangshe stared at Du Miao for a long time before sneering. She basically helped Du Ling'er insult Du Miao. Of course, she knew what Du Miao meant. Indeed, before today, she did feel that Gu Erlang was indeed a good candidate. However, after knowing that he had that sum of money, she looked down on him. No matter what, he was just a hunter in the wilderness. If she had such a sum of money, she would be able to prepare a lavish dowry for Ling'er. Would she still have to worry about Ling'er not being able to marry into a good family? If Ling'er married into a scholarly family and found a diligent husband, wouldn't her future life be 100 times better than if she had married a hunter? Du Wangshe already had a plan in mind, but she didn't reveal it immediately. She had controlled Du Miao for so long, so she naturally understood Du Miao's thoughts. She also understood that Du Miao explained everything because she wanted her help. However, she didn't intend to agree so easily. This girl had to beg again and again. The Du family each had their own thoughts, but at least they had a peaceful night. The next morning, the refugees, who had rested for half a month, could finally set off. This made the refugees, who had been on tenterhooks because of the plague for so long, show rare joy on their faces. Even though they knew that the future was bound to be difficult, it was better than waiting for death here. However, unlike the overjoyed refugees, Du Yuanrua, who was the only one who had yet to recover, wasn't happy. He had thought of all kinds of ways that Pei Qian would torture him, but no matter what, he didn't expect that Pei Qian actually found a large vat and placed him in it like a pickled vegetable. Now that the temperature outside was low, even if a pot of water was boiled, the water would become cold after being placed outside for a while. However, Pei Qian had a special solution. He even set up a brazier under the vat to heat it up at any time. Pei Qian, F*ck your ancestors. Du Yuanrua cursed, but he couldn't stop the officials and soldiers in the entire refugee camp from listening to Pei Qian's instructions. Therefore, other than cursing, he couldn't find any way to escape the current predicament. Madam Lu, I know that you're the kindest. Look, you even took good care of those refugees. I'm also your patient. You can't just watch me be soaked in a vat and cooked forever, right? Du Yuanrua cursed all the way, but realized that it was useless to continue cursing like this. Moreover, what was most unacceptable was that Pei Qian didn't give him any water to drink. The food provided was also as hard and dry as stone. It wasn't that he hadn't thought of asking the soldier driving the carriage for water, but the soldier actually said that as long as he lowered his head, he could drink a jar of water. That bastard Pei Qian. Du Yuanrua finally resigned himself to fate after a day. When he saw Lin Suisui, who had come to check on his condition, he was even more pious than if he had seen Buddha. Although he was a good .4. He wasn't stupid. If the young lady in front of him was willing to put in a good word for him, he wouldn't have to continue being cooked like this, right? Young Master Du, your injuries haven't healed yet. This medicinal bath is for the sake of your injuries. Lin Suisui stood by the carriage as she sized up the situation in the carriage, but she didn't get close. Her tone was very gentle, but Du Yuanrua wasn't comforted. He, who was usually a tyrant in the capital, was about to cry at this moment. I think I'm already fine. If I continue to stay in hot water like this, I think I'll be cooked. Chapter 52. Scheme. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 52. Scheme. Translator. Henyi Translations Editor. Henyi Translations. Young Master Du, don't worry. The prince said that the people he arranged to take care of you are all experienced. They won't let you get cooked. Lin Suisui couldn't help but laugh as she comforted Du Yuanrua in a teasing tone. Besides, your injuries aren't that serious. You'll recover in about 2 more days. For the sake of your health, bear with it for the time being. With that, Lin Suisui covered her mouth as she left while snickering. Just as Lin Suisui had promised Du Yuanrua, Pei Qian really didn't want Du Yuanrua dead. Therefore, although he had separated his followers, he didn't stop them from approaching Du Yuanrua, although their approach was useless. On the way back, Lin Suisui happened to see 2 familiar faces. She had been busy with the recent epidemic, but now, she remembered that these 2 followers were the ones she had seen interacting with the 2 northern barbarians in the mountain. However, Lin Suisui still remembered Lu Zai's instructions and didn't choose to alert the enemy. Instead, she lowered her head and planned to leave directly. But just because she wanted to leave didn't mean that others were willing to cooperate. The 2 followers came over and stopped her. Madam Lu, may I ask about my young master's condition? The follower in the lead was quite polite. He bowed respectfully to Lin Suisui and asked politely, this makes our travel inconvenient, so please think of another way to remedy the situation. They had been scolded for as long as Du Yuanrua had been soaked inside. Moreover, if there was no solution to this matter, with Du Yuanrua's temper, the first thing he would do after getting out would be to silence them. Therefore, the most effective way for them to save themselves now was to quickly release their master from the vat. I'm afraid I can't. Lin Suisui shook her head and replied very sincerely, your young master is the only patient in the refugee camp who hasn't recovered yet. As you know, your young master has a noble status. A doctor like me isn't qualified to treat him. Therefore, the original plan was to ask you guys to escort young Master Du back to the capital to find an imperial physician. However, the conditions are limited now. This place is not only far from the capital, but he also has the plague. If something goes wrong halfway, it would be a serious matter that no one can afford to bear. Therefore, Mr. Pei thought of this idea to speed up the recovery of your master. If he stopped taking the medicine at this moment and changed the treatment method, firstly, all the suffering your young master had suffered previously might be in vain. Secondly, he might pass the plague on to others. If your young master came out before recovering, wouldn't it be bad if the plague was passed on to the people who took care of him? Therefore, although young Master Du will suffer for the time being, it will be very beneficial to his recovery. Lin Sui bowed slightly as she smiled politely. If there's nothing else, I'll go back first. Looking at Lin Sui's departing figure, although the two servants felt that what she said might not be true, what else could they do? After all, if they really insisted on letting their young master out of the water vat, if anything happened. If they fell into Du Yuanruo's hands, they could get a quick death, but if he provoked the sadistic Pei Qian, the two of them couldn't help but shiver and shut up. Lin Sui ignored the two people behind her. Wanting to go back quickly, she quickened her pace. However, halfway through, she bumped into Lu Zhe, who was rushing over. Is everything okay? After Lu Zhe sized Lin Sui up and saw that she looked fine, he heaved a sigh of relief and frowned in disapproval. Didn't I say earlier that if you want to go over, you have to wait for me? Although Du Yuanruo is boiling in the vat now, his followers haven't left. What if he acts up and harms you? I just went over to take a look. If you're worried, I'll wait for you to accompany me next time. Lin Sui apologized obediently. She just wanted Lu Zhe to go into the mountain to search for prey again and accompany her when he returned. However, encountering the two followers today reminded her that in order to avoid trouble, it was better to stay with him next time. By the way, I saw those two followers again when I came back today. On the way back, Lin Sui recalled their previous encounter. She reached out and tugged at Lu Zhe's sleeve as she lowered her voice and said to him, "They're the two I saw in the forest that day." Lu Zhe stopped and subconsciously turned around. They caused trouble for you? No. I just feel that it's a little strange. Lin Sui shook her head and in a low voice, she quickly told him what had happened after interacting with the two followers today. I feel that these two people don't look like the two we encountered in the forest previously. These two people have different figures from the two we encountered in the forest previously. Moreover, from their submissive appearance, they don't look like the two people we saw in the forest previously. More importantly, the two of them don't look like people with profound martial arts skills. If we can disguise ourselves, I'm sure others can too. Lu Zhe didn't think that this was that strange. Although they had seen them rendezvousing that day, the information it could provide them was actually very limited. Therefore, they could only take it one step at a time. These people are really idle. Lin Sui despised these schemes. This place was already thousands of miles away from the capital, but was still used as a battlefield. Although these refugees had their own shortcomings and were indeed not very outstanding, they were all citizens of the empire. These people's former hometown had encountered a disaster, so they were heading to the north for a way out. However, they still couldn't escape the schemes of those people. It doesn't matter. Since we know, as long as we observe carefully, we will definitely be able to discover evidence. As long as we get even a little evidence, with Pei Qian's ability, it won't be difficult for him to find the truth. Lu Zhe knew very well what Lin Sui hated the most. He reached out and patted the dejected girl's shoulder to comfort her. However, these words didn't have any effect. Instead, these words made Lin Sui even more unhappy. If Pei Qian finds out that the ones who caused all this are actually his subordinates, or rather, the forces behind him, wouldn't he be even more ruthless? Chapter 53. Are you satisfied now, jealous girl. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Chapter 53. Are you satisfied now, jealous girl? Translator. Henyi Translations Editor. Henyi Translations Noel.N Lin Suesue's reaction surprised Lu Zhe for a moment. According to Lu Zhe's understanding during this period of time, Lin Suesue disliked these schemes, so she had such keen awareness. Why are you looking at me like that? I don't like those schemes, but I'm not stupid. Lin Suesue immediately understood the meaning in Lu Zhe's eyes when he looked at her. She looked away awkwardly as she emphasized. Therefore, even if we want to send a message to Pei Qian, we can't go ourselves. Lu Zhe nodded and didn't continue to discuss this with Lin Suesue. He even agreed with the girl and nodded. This way, even if anything happens, it won't implicate us. Lin Suesue was about to say something when she suddenly shut her mouth and turned her head away from him. Lu Zhe was feeling puzzled when he saw Du Miaoer and her sister walking over with a few women not far away. What a coincidence. Madam Lu, second brother Gu, have you guys just returned? It was obvious that Lin Suesue was ignoring them, but Du Wan'er seemed to be completely unaware. She still acted like she was friends with them and rushed towards them in a few steps. She looked happy and surprised. Afraid that this woman would knock her down, Lin Suesue took 2 steps back. Fortunately, although Du Wan'er looked reckless, she actually held back. She only stopped 2 to 3 steps in front of them. Her gaze swept back and forth between Lin Suesue and Lu Zhe a few times before she continued to say with a smile. Hey, are you guys unhappy? Did you guys quarrel? I did something wrong and made my wife unhappy. I'm apologizing to her now. Lu Zhe's expression didn't change, but the coldness and disgust in his eyes still caught Lin Suesue's attention. Her heart tightened. She was about to speak to ease the awkwardness, but Lu Zhe beat her to it. As soon as Lu Zhe said this, not only was Du Wan'er, who was standing opposite him, taken aback, but even Lin Suesue was dumbfounded. How was she supposed to answer this? How could that be? Mr. Gu, you're such a good person. How could you have done something wrong? Du Wan'er was stunned for a long time before she regained her senses. Although she knew that it was a little inappropriate for her to speak now, she was still unwilling to give up. People said that Lin Suesue had contributed greatly to resolving the epidemic. However, she was just a country bumpkin. She just happened to encounter this plague and took advantage of it. What was there to be proud of? Everyone makes mistakes. No one is an exception. Lu Zhe's response was still indifferent, but his tone changed. When he looked at Du Wan'er again, his gaze suddenly turned sharp. However, you don't know me, yet came to tell me all this. Have you mistaken me for someone else? Pfft. Not only Lin Suesue, but even some of the women who were standing with Du Miaoer and her sister couldn't help but laugh. Du Wan'er looked at Lu Zhe in shock. How could he say that? However, Lu Zhe didn't stop. Just as Du Miaoer was about to come forward to save the day, he continued, the next time you strike up a conversation with someone, please be smarter and don't look for a married man like me. My wife is very good. I don't have the money or the intention to raise a mistress. Please have some self-respect. After saying that, he ignored Du Wan'er's expression as he reached out and grabbed Lin Suesue's hand. Lin Suesue was still standing there in a daze. He pulled her around Du Wan'er and the group of dumbfounded women, then quickly left this place. You're too sharp-tongued. Lin Suesue blinked and only came back to her senses after walking for a long time. She couldn't help but marvel. If it were a more sensitive woman, she probably would have banged her head against the wall on the spot. However, Lin Suesue had to admit that she was quite happy. She felt so touched and gratified. Why? Are you worried? Lu Zhe chuckled. Although the little girl beside him didn't say it explicitly, her excited look still made him feel that she was in a good mood. Although he would ignore those girls that flirted with him, he had to take the emotions of the little girl beside him into account. Of course not. Lin Suisui shook her head and said without hiding anything, no matter what difficulties they encountered now, you're still a married man in their eyes. However, they ignored that fact and continued to target you. How shameless. Yes, the situation they were currently facing was very difficult, but if they really wanted to save themselves, was seducing someone else's husband the only way? Even if their stepmother made things difficult for them, the children left behind by the previous wife, as long as they were determined and smart enough, they could find something their stepmother cared about and wield it over her, then the current crisis could be resolved. Their stepmother also had children. Wasn't their stepmother worried that her reputation might affect her child's marriage prospects? However, they didn't try to deal with it the right way. Instead, they wanted to use this dirty trick. By the way, when you were still in that position, you treated those girls from prominent political families like this too. With the trouble in front of her resolved, Lin Suisui couldn't help but gossip. She turned to look at Lu Zhe curiously. When he was in the East Palace, he must have had all kinds of beauties around him, right? What else? If I don't know how to refuse women's advances, I'm afraid there won't be a place for you in the East Palace when you marry me. Lu Zhe stopped and turned to look at Lin Suisui with a faint smile. What else do you want to know about me? I'll definitely tell you everything I know. Who asked about you? I was just asking casually. Lin Suisui blushed under his gaze. Her eyes darted around and she bit her lip, trying her best to hide the inexplicable nervousness that was surging from the bottom of her heart. No, why was she nervous? I spent most of my time in the army previously. When I returned to the capital, there were a lot of troublesome matters to deal with. From the beginning to the end, I only had an engagement with you. I didn't have an engagement with those young ladies from prestigious families. Lu Zhe couldn't help but reach out and pinch Lin Suisui's bulging cheek. He teased her in amusement, "Are you satisfied now, jealous girl?" Chapter 54. Shameless, eat as much as you are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 54. Shameless, eat as much as you want. Translator. Henyi Translations Editor. Henyi Translations, Ba. Holding her cheek that had just been pinched by Lu Zhe, Lin Suisui looked hatefully at the man who was laughing happily, and spat. He really knew how to flatter himself. She was just curious. She wouldn't get jealous over him. Seeing that Lu Zhe had walked away, Lin Suisui hurriedly quickened her pace. Wait for me. Didn't we agree that you would wait for me wherever you go in the future? You liar. The two of them walked quickly and naturally didn't have the time to care about the Du sisters, who were crying in embarrassment behind them. After all, no matter what, with Lu Zhe's words today, any young lady who still had the slightest sense of dignity probably wouldn't come looking for him after suffering such embarrassment. However, it turned out that they were too simple-minded. When they set up camp the next day, the two sisters actually appeared in front of them again. However, this time, not only were there some women who looked familiar, but even Mrs. Luo and the others were not far away. Lin Suisui had been going up the mountain with Lu Zhe recently, so Mrs. Luo and the others didn't ask her to join them. However, there were only so many places to go around the camp. For safety's sake, most of the women would choose to gather together now. Initially, Lin Suisui didn't intend to delay any longer. Mrs. Luo seemed to have the same thoughts as her. She only nodded and smiled at Lin Suisui before lowering her head to get busy. On the other hand, Mrs. He stopped her. Madam Lu, are you planning to enter the mountain together? Yes. Lin Suisui nodded. She didn't avoid this intrusive question. With my husband. It's so dangerous in the mountains. Why don't you stay with me? Anyway, it's just for a short while. Even if you don't keep an eye on him, your man won't be able to escape. When women reached an age, they would become more shrewish and teasing, especially towards women like Lin Suisui, who had just gotten married. They didn't shy away from jokes. As soon as Mrs. He said this, the surrounding women echoed and laughed. That's right. No matter how powerful your man is, he'll be restrained if he brings you along when hunting in the mountains. You might as well stay with us and save yourself the trouble of running so far. It was obvious that they had kind intentions. Madame Lu, actually, everyone wants you to stay this time because of their own selfish motives. Without waiting for Lin Suisui to explain, Du Miaoer suddenly looked at her sincerely. Everyone knows that you're proficient in medicine. We were saved because of your good medical skills. The further north we go, the colder the weather becomes. We were wondering if you could teach us about some herbs that can ward off the cold. This way, we can boil some herbs on a daily basis. If we really catch a cold, we won't have to panic. It had to be said that Du Miaoer had found a perfect excuse this time. From the perspective of others, she was doing this for everyone's benefit. Therefore, as soon as she said this, she naturally gained their support. Lin Suisui nodded and replied straightforwardly, okay. She turned around and glanced at Lu Zhe to reassure him. Then, she took the basket containing Little White and handed it to Lu Zhe to let him go up the mountain first. Du Miaoer was surprised that Lin Suisui agreed so readily. She originally thought that based on Lin Suisui's wariness and disgust towards her, if she had mentioned this matter, Lin Suisui definitely wouldn't agree so readily. If Lin Suisui didn't agree, she would have something to say next. Unfortunately, it's good for everyone to prepare some of these herbs. This way, even if we reach the northern base, we can sell them to the pharmacy and exchange them for some money. Lin Suisui didn't give Du Miaoer a chance to show off. Who didn't know how to act like the good guy? Since this chance was given to her, why should others benefit from it? Things indeed progressed as Lin Suisui had expected. The women, who were originally grateful to Du Miaoer, couldn't care less now. They ignored Du Miaoer and her sister. Afraid that they would miss her explanation of the herbs, they tried their best to squeeze to Lin Suisui's side. Recognizing the herbs wasn't enough. They had to know how to dig for them as well. No matter what herb it was, keeping the entire herb intact was key, especially when it came to roots. It was even more important that they didn't ruin it. Lin Suisui was serious about teaching them, so she explained in detail. She also answered the women's questions about herbs amiably and politely. She looked gentle and easy to get along with. Lin Suisui's conduct naturally gained the good impression of most women. Without the alleged sense of distance, the real her easily dispelled the negative rumors about her. However, Lin Suisui's actions naturally caused some people to feel indignant. Mrs. He rolled her eyes and thought of the rumors she had heard about the plague. Then, she reached out and pushed aside the crowd around Lin Suisui as she leaned forward and asked in a raised voice, "Madame Lu, you've contributed greatly to ending the plague. Didn't the officials above say that they would give you some rewards?" Madame He had found a good opportunity to interrupt. If she mentioned this topic while everyone was feeling exceptionally grateful to Lin Suisui, it was easy for them to resonate with her. According to the news that the He family's sister-in-law had heard, Madame Lu had received a huge reward this time. If she said that there was no reward this time, she would be able to encourage everyone to ask those officials for a reward for her. At that time, she would see how Lin Suisui would deal with it. However, if she said that there was a reward this time, she could also ask about how much she had obtained this time. No matter how much it was, she would still have a way to cause trouble. The higher-up said that there will be a reward. Lin Suisui raised her eyes slightly and looked at Mrs. He with a faint smile. There was a hint of understanding in her eyes. Of course, she understood that Mrs. He definitely had ill intentions when asking this question, so she didn't intend to take it lying down. However, it said that this kind of thing can only be decided after reporting to the officials. If you're curious about what the reward is, why don't you ask Mr. Pei yourself? Chapter 55. Pei Qian's purpose. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 55. Pei Qian's purpose. Translator. Henyi Translations Editor. Henyi Translations. The problem that Mrs. He had prepared to throw at Lin Suisui was perfectly thrown back at her. She wouldn't dare to ask Mr. Pei, who was like Hades to those in the refugee camp. Therefore, even if she was still indignant, she could only give up and let this matter pass. Lin Suisui barely picked any herbs or wild vegetables today. She was focused on teaching the women how to identify and dig for herbs. However, she didn't return to the camp empty-handed. Most of the women knew how to repay kindness. Seeing that Lin Suisui had delayed her own business by teaching them for most of the day, how could they not feel guilty? They all sent the herbs they had picked to Lin Suisui. Because the weather was cold and she had harvested a lot of wild vegetables today, Lin Suisui wanted to stew them. With the wild boar oil as the base, Lin Suisui first used the condiments she could find to roast the pheasant meat, then added water to cook it. Her good culinary skills allowed her to use simple cooking utensils and condiments to make delicious food even in the wilderness. However, to Lin Suisui's surprise, the aroma of the stewed pheasant attracted an uninvited guest. Pei Qian came very suddenly, but he didn't come empty-handed. He strolled over with a lamb leg in his left hand and 2 jars of wine in his right. He didn't bring any followers. Let me borrow the fire. Pei Qian didn't stand on ceremony. He handed the lamb leg and wine he had brought over to Lu Zhe. Don't tell me you won't even let me do this. Lu Zhe glanced at him, but didn't say anything else. He reached out and took the things Pei Qian handed him. Then, he turned around and silently took out the grill, then placed the lamb leg above the fire to roast it. At this moment, Pei Qian didn't put on any airs. He sat on the ground while leaning on a wooden stake beside Lu Zhe. His lavish robe made it seem like he wasn't in the wilderness, but in an extremely noble hall. It was such a pity. Lin Suisui though to herself, but her gaze landed on the soup pot in front of her. She sat there with her eyes lowered, showing her rejection. Is Madame Lu in a bad mood? However, just because Lin Suisui didn't intend to get involved didn't mean that Pei Qian was willing to cooperate. He raised his eyebrows slightly as he raised his hand to slap away the mud on a jar of wine beside him. He glanced at Lin Suisui, who was sitting across the fire from him, and chuckled. I heard that Gu Erlang has been doing well recently. The women outside are all throwing themselves at him. Are you jealous, Madame Lu? Pei Qian didn't use a wine bowl. He raised the wine jar in his hand and took a sip. Then, he threw the other unopened wine jar to Lu Zhe. Lu Zhe didn't refuse. He raised his hand and opened the wine jar, then said, You also said that you only heard about it. What you hear about might be hearsay. Seeing is believing. My wife has always been by my side. She has always known whether this rumor is true or not the best. But I've always believed that what you see might not be true, and what you hear might not be false. Gu Erlang, even if you can refuse once, there's still a long time to go. How long can you hold it in? Pei Qian wasn't angry. He shook the wine jar in his hand and continued trying to set Lu Zhe up. You're overthinking it. I'm just a hunter in the wilderness. It's already difficult for me to support my family. How can I have the ability to entertain other women? Lu Zhe raised the wine jar and gently clinked it with the jar Pei Qian handed over. Then, he took a sip of the strong wine and replied calmly. Then, what you mean is that if you become rich in the future, you'll accept those women. Pei Qian didn't give up. He insisted on finding loopholes in Lu Zhe's words and continued to slander him. Madame Lu, you have to be careful. He's not as simple as he seems. I don't think I've offended you before. Lu Zhe was a little annoyed. He looked up helplessly and met Pei Qian's gaze. Of course not. To be honest, I should thank you for your efforts in ending the plague. Pei Qian shook the wine jar in his hand and didn't take Lu Zai's counterattack to heart at all. He continued to look at Lin Suisui, who was sitting at the side silently. Madam Lu, if you have anything to say, just say it. With our relationship, I'll help you no matter what. You're really good at joking. Lin Suisui could only look up at Pei Qian and force a smile. She replied wryly, how can an ordinary family like ours afford that sort of thing? Perhaps not in the past, but didn't you hand all the money to Gu Erlang? With the money he has now, what's the difficulty of raising a few girls? Pei Qian shifted his gaze back to Lu Zai and sized him up before continuing, Erlang, you probably have enough money to buy the entire Spring Breeze restaurant now, right? Spring Breeze restaurant? What Spring Breeze restaurant? Lin Suisui's heart skipped a beat. Before Lu Zai could speak, she asked with feigned curiosity, where is that place? Spring Breeze restaurant is a famous restaurant in the capital. Madam Lu doesn't know, but what about you, Gu Erlang? Don't you know? Pei Qian smiled and didn't divert his attention from Lu Zai because of Lin Suisui's interruption. Have you forgotten? My wife and I are not from the capital. Even though we stayed in the capital for a while, we entered because we were refugees. We only stayed in the refugees' gathering place in the capital. Even if we wanted to go to those upscale places to broaden our horizons, others wouldn't let us go. Lu Zai reached out and flipped the lamb leg on the grill. Then, he looked up and met Pei Qian's scrutinizing gaze as he slowly replied. He knew very well that Pei Qian definitely hadn't come over just for dinner, as he had said. Pei Qian had never stopped suspecting his and Lin Suisui's identities. The purpose of his visit this time was probably to probe. Chapter 56. Rescue. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 56. Rescue. Translator. Henyi Translations Editor. Henyi Translations, the food is ready. Seeing that Lu Zai and Pei Qian looked at each other with hostility, Lin Suisui couldn't just stand back and watch anymore. She coughed and temporarily broke the stalemate. Madam Lu is a good cook. Pei Qian took the soup bowl from Lin Suisui and looked at the milky white soup. Before he even tasted it, he praised her. Lin Suisui chuckled. You haven't eaten it yet. How do you know that my culinary skills are good? Perhaps it looks good, but it actually tastes terrible. It's a feast for the eyes. A delicious-looking dish has already won 40 to 50 points. As for the rest, it's often not that important. Pei Qian wasn't embarrassed to be exposed. Instead, he looked even more calm and more harmless than Lu Zai, who was sitting beside him. Perhaps because of Lin Suisui's interruption, Pei Qian became much less hostile and much more relaxed than when he was talking to Lu Zai. However, Lu Zai and Lin Suisui couldn't let their guard down just because of this. This meal looked extremely sumptuous, but Lin Suisui almost had a stomachache. Lin Suisui only heaved a sigh of relief after sending off Pei Qian, who had eaten his fill and left in satisfaction. She turned to look at Lu Zai, whose expression wasn't much better than hers, and complained in a low voice, why do you think he came today? I don't know. Anyway, he wasn't really here for dinner. Lu Zai stared in the direction Pei Qian had left in. After a long time, he said in an impassive tone, according to the date, we should be able to reach the base in less than a month. At that time, they would really be able to escape. Forget it. It's good that we know that he doesn't have good intentions. Along the way, no matter how unwilling we are, we can only swallow our anger. Lin Suisui frowned and sighed. Then, she helped Lu Zai clean up the mess from cooking dinner. When she saw the 2 wine jars on the ground, her frown deepened even more and she turned to look at Lu Zai. He came with wine this time. Perhaps he wanted to get you drunk and get information out of you. Just this jar of wine won't make me drunk. Lu Zai patted Lin Suisui's shoulder to reassure her. Then, he took the soup pot from her hand as he instructed in a low voice, "Go to the carriage and rest. I'll clean up." It was already dark. He was worried about letting her go to the stream alone to wash the cooker in cold water. "I'll accompany you." Lin Suisui wasn't sleepy yet, so she wanted to accompany Lu Zhe. Seeing that she was in good spirits, Lu Zhe didn't stop her. He drew a piece of wood from the bonfire and used it as a torch. Then, he walked towards the stream with Lin Suisui. "I really couldn't tell how well-rounded you are." Lin Suisui squatted on a rock by the stream as she held a torch for Lu Zhe. Seeing Lu Zhe wash the dishes and the pots skillfully, she couldn't help but chuckle and praise, "I thought a man like you would think that men should refrain from helping out in the kitchen. When we're fighting in the outside world, if we follow this rule, we'll all starve to death." Lu Zhe sneered. "These words are said by those pedants. Just treat it as a joke. Don't take it seriously. Didn't anyone take care of you when you were fighting in the army?" Lin Suisui tilted her head. She vaguely remembered that she had assisted in the military camp as a military doctor in the past. However, at that time, not to mention the high and mighty generals, even small sergeants who led 100 people had servants. Lu Zhe was the crown prince of the East Palace. If he had led the army previously, he couldn't have been worse off than those generals in the military camp, right? When we go out on an expedition, if we go deep into the grassland or face the enemy in the desert, who can take better care of ourselves but ourselves? Lu Zhe placed the washed bowl into the clay pot as he answered Lin Suisui's question. "If we're unlucky sometimes, it's normal to stay out in the wilderness for 10 days or half a month without bathing. Why would we be so picky? After we finished eating the dry rations and drinking water we brought, in order to survive, we couldn't care less about the other things. In fact, at the most difficult time, we even drank our own urine to quench our thirst." Lu Zhe stood up and handed the clay pot to Lin Suisui. Then, he took the torch from her and led her back. However, this time, Lu Zhe stopped and reached out to pull Lin Suisui behind him. "What's wrong?" Lin Suisui, who had a hunch that something was wrong, didn't dare to move. She cooperatively shrank behind Lu Zhe and lowered her voice. "Did we encounter wolves again?" In the north, everything was good except for the abundance of wild wolves and hyenas. At night, there were green lanterns outside the camp from time to time. These were all wild wolves attracted by the refugees. Fortunately, there were many people in the refugee camp and there was a bonfire. The wolves didn't dare to approach, but they were unwilling to give up. Therefore, they stubbornly guarded outside without leaving. They were just waiting for those people to run out of the refugee camp so that they could eat them. Lin Suisui subconsciously thought of this possibility. Although she had experienced dealing with wild wolves and jackals before, she still instinctively felt nervous and afraid when she thought of those cunning and terrifying beasts. "Do you hear human moans?" Lu Zhe tilted his head and tried his best to distinguish if the moan that had just entered his ears was real or an illusion. Hearing Lu Zhe's question, Lin Suisui didn't dare to be careless. She cooperated with him and tried her best to investigate the surroundings. When she listened hard, she really heard some strange sounds. "Over there." Lin Suisui tugged at Lu Zhe's sleeve and pointed at the bushes on her left. "It seems that the sound came from there. Follow behind me, just 3 steps away. Don't get too far, and don't get too close." Lu Zhe turned around and whispered to Lin Suisui about what to do next as he walked in the direction of the commotion. Lin Suisui followed him carefully. She had taken less than 6 or 7 steps when she keenly smelled blood. After walking another 10 steps, just standing by the bushes, they could clearly see someone lying in a pool of blood. Chapter 57. I'm worried about leaving my wife here alone. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 57. I'm worried about leaving my wife here alone. Translator. Henyi Translations Editor. Henyi translations. Lu Zhe took 2 more steps forward with the torch. After taking a closer look at the person on the ground with Lin Suisui, their expressions became solemn. The person on the ground wasn't wearing the clothes of ordinary people. He was wearing a leather coat that only soldiers in the army wore. Lin Suisui didn't need Lu Zhe's reminder. She squatted down and began to check the soldier's injuries. Soon, she turned around and whispered to Lu Zhe, "He has 2 blade wounds on his body, but the most fatal wounds are probably the penetrating wounds caused by the 2 arrows in his chest. Now, it looks like he's in a coma caused by excessive blood loss. What should we do now? There's no garrison here. This person seems to have come from the border. Let's go and send him to the prince." As Lu Zhe spoke, he handed the torch and cooking utensils to Lin Suisui. He bent down and picked up the unconscious soldier on the ground, then turned around and rushed towards the camp. Pei Qian came quickly after receiving the news. When Pei Qian entered the tent, Lin Suisui had already treated half of the soldier's injuries with the medicine Qian he had found for her. "What's going on?" Pei Qian didn't disturb Lin Suisui, who was treating the soldier's injuries. Instead, he asked Lu Zhe. He had been separated from the 2 of them for less than 2 hours, but they had already given him such a big surprise. "We happened to see him when we went to the stream to wash the bowls and utensils," Lu Zhe replied simply. "Seeing that he was injured near the camp, we thought he was a soldier from our camp at first. In the end, we found out that he wasn't." Lu Zhe's reason was quite impeccable. After all, the soldiers escorting the refugees to the north were dressed similarly to the injured person. If one didn't know these things, they wouldn't be able to tell. "Do you know this person's background?" Pei Qian looked at Lu Zhe deeply and didn't probe further. Instead, he turned to ask Qian He. "I think he's a sergeant from the Yanyan army at the border of the north." As Qian He spoke, he took out the waist token he had just received from the soldier and handed it to Pei Qian. "However, the Yanyan army's camp is far from here." Qian He stopped talking at the right time and didn't continue. He actually suspected that this person might be a deserter, but his injuries. "You suspect that he's a deserter?" Pei Qian could more or less guess Qian He's thoughts. He only snorted and didn't ask further. Instead, he slowly walked to Lin Suisui, who had already stood up from beside the soldier, and asked, "How is it going?" "His life is saved for the time being, but he's seriously injured. The conditions here are limited. Whether he can survive or not depends on himself." Lin Suisui was very vague. This person's injuries were much more serious than she had imagined. It was already a miracle that he had survived until now. As for whether he could survive next, it was difficult to say. "Can you wake him up now?" Pei Qian looked at Lin Suisui and continued to ask in an indifferent tone. "Yes, but," Lin Suisui was a little hesitant. Of course, she had a way to wake this soldier up quickly, but the result of this method might make this soldier, who was originally saved, completely lose the possibility of survival. Then let him wake up immediately. Pei Qian didn't hesitate at all, but this order wasn't directed at Lin Suisui, but at the medical officers standing not far from her. "You guys have been standing here and watching for a long time. It's time for you guys to come over and help." Lin Suisui hesitated for a moment before standing up and saying to Pei Qian, "Let me do it. I checked his injuries just now, so for now, I'm the person who knows his condition the best." Actually, Lin Suisui was a little grateful that Pei Qian had made this arrangement. He probably didn't want her to do something that was cruel to doctors. However, Lin Suisui was unwilling to give up on the life of the young soldier in front of her. No matter why he was here and what his motive was, she wouldn't give up until the final moment. "Are you sure?" Pei Qian was a little surprised by Lin Suisui's insistence, but he didn't give up and asked for her opinion again. "You also know that if you want him to wake up immediately, you have to use a ruthless method. He might die in front of you. If that's the case, aren't you afraid?" It's not time to make a definitive conclusion yet. It's too early to say this. As Lin Suisui spoke, she had already taken out her needle kit and opened it. As she was busy, she didn't forget to say to Pei Qian, "I'll use silver needles to stimulate his acupuncture points first. I can wake him up immediately. However, I hope that you can ask questions as soon as possible. It's best if it doesn't take more than 5 minutes." Pei Qian agreed and waved his hand for everyone in the tent to leave. The medical officials who had been called over by Qian He were naturally more than happy to leave. Although the remaining officials were a little unwilling, they thought that it was useless for them to know this news that was completely unrelated to escorting refugees, so they didn't force it and followed them out. Therefore, after everyone left, only the soldier lying on the ground, Pei Qian, Lin Suisui, and Lu Zhe, were left in the huge tent. Qian He stood at the entrance of the tent and gave Lu Zhe meaningful looks for a long time, but Lu Zhe acted as if he didn't see them at all and was unmoved. "Gu Erlang, are you going to stay too?" Pei Qian was so angry that he laughed as he stared at Lu Zhe. He really didn't expect this person to be so thick-skinned. "I'm worried about leaving my wife here alone." Lu Zhe looked up slightly and replied very reasonably. Pei Qian and Lu Zhe's confrontation didn't last long this time. Pei Qian chose to compromise. He waved at Qian He and gestured for him to go out to stand guard. At the same time, he tacitly agreed to Lu Zhe's decision to stay. "Let's get started." After Qian He left, Pei Qian turned to look at Lin Suisui and instructed her to start. Lin Suisui was very skilled at acupuncture. She didn't look like a newbie who had just come into contact with acupuncture. Pei Qian stood at the side and watched her movements. It was unknown what he was thinking. Even when the soldier had woken up, Pei Qian had yet to recover from his thoughts. In the end, Lin Suisui couldn't help but remind him. "Mr. Pei." Chapter 58. Are you worried about the fourth prince? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 58. Are you worried about the fourth prince? Translator. Henyi Translations Editor. Henyi Translations, yes. Pei Qian came back to his senses and looked at Lin Suisui. What? He's already awake. What do you have to ask? Lin Suisui took a step back and moved to Lu Zhe's side. Although the sergeant lying on the bed had already opened his eyes, it was obvious that he wasn't completely awake yet. By the time Pei Qian stood beside him, the fully awake sergeant subconsciously sat up from the bed. "I have to deliver a letter. What letter do you want to send?" "I'm the Minister of Justice, Pei Qian. I've received the imperial decree to escort refugees to the northern region. You're seriously injured now. If you have any important military information, you can report it to me. I'll immediately arrange for it to be sent back to the capital." As Pei Qian spoke, he had already taken out his waist token and placed it in front of the soldier. As expected, his method of directly revealing his identity was very effective. The soldier panted for a moment before reaching into his pocket. After a while, he took out a small cloth bag and handed it to Pei Qian with trembling hands. "This is what my master asked me to send back to the capital before he died. Here, there is evidence that the general of the northern part of the town colluded with foreign enemies, embezzled military pay, and trafficked military goods. My master was killed, and we don't know if General Zhua is dead or alive. The 8 of us ran out together to report this evidence back to the capital, but for some reason, the news leaked. We were chased all the way, and in the end, I was the only one who escaped. Sir, please pass this evidence to the Ministry of War." It was unknown if it was because he was exhausted or if he had lost his energy after entrusting everything to him, but the soldier closed his eyes before he could finish speaking. Seeing that the situation wasn't right, Lin Suisui quickly went forward and applied silver needles to his acupoints. At the same time, she didn't forget to stuff a piece of ginseng that Qian He had just sent over into his mouth. "I've already tried my best to protect his heart with silver needles. If he can survive tonight safely, although it will take a long time for his body to recover in the future, there's a high chance that I can save his life. Lin Suisui didn't ask further. She only turned around and explained the situation to Pei Qian after giving the soldier a needle. Pei Qian nodded. For once, he had no intention of keeping Lin Suisui. He didn't even instruct them not to say anything after they left. He raised his hand and gestured for them to leave. You guys can go back. A few medical officers will take care of the rest here. It's a little inconvenient for you to stay here and take care of a man. Thank you for your understanding, Mr. Pei. We'll go back now. Lu Zhe cupped his hands and bowed before turning around to protect Lin Suisui as they walked out of the tent. Pei Qian looked displeased. Do you know those people too? After the two of them walked for a while and saw that there was no one else around, Lin Suisui gently tugged at the corner of Lu Zhe's shirt and whispered into his ear curiously. Gao Shui is the general who stabilizes the north and Pei Qian's uncle. Lu Zhe naturally knew about the collusion between officials. Seeing Lin Suisui ask, he didn't hide it and calmly told her about their relationship. The Gao family was originally a poor family in the capital. Early on, Gao Shui relied on working in the casino and working for loan sharks to earn a living. Later on, for some reason, he actually got to know Pei Qian's widowed aunt. With the Pei family as a guarantor, they sent Gao Shui to the army for a while. Later on, with the help of the Pei family, he naturally rose through the ranks step by step, so that he became the famous general who stabilizes the north. If what that sergeant said just now is true, if the evidence in his hands is sent to Pei Qian, wouldn't that be a one-way trip? Lin Suisui tightened her grip on Lu Zhe's clothes. She thought of what the soldier had said just now. If the person guarding the border was really such a bastard, then there will be a solution to this matter. Don't worry. As Lu Zhe looked down at Lin Suisui's hand that was gripping the corner of her shirt tightly, his tone subconsciously softened. He reached out to hold Lin Suisui's hand and pulled her back slowly. Pei Qian is probably more trustworthy than you think. But isn't this matter also related to the Pei family? If this matter is exposed, won't the Pei family and the fourth prince suffer? Lin Suisui wasn't relieved by Lu Zhe's answer. Instead, she became even more nervous. She didn't know why Lu Zhe trusted Pei Qian so much, but she also knew that these messy court affairs were as difficult to deal with as trying to determine the right amount of medicine. They seemed unrelated, but in fact, they were all connected. If the dosage of one medicine was wrong, the entire prescription would be useless. The reason Pei Qian could have such power and authority now was that he was a member of the Pei family and the fourth prince's cousin. If he didn't have this status, what right did he have to torture and insult Du Yuanruo? Moreover, what the general who stabilizes the north was involved in this time wasn't an ordinary crime. Everything else was fine, but colluding with external enemies was enough to destroy the clan for eternity. If someone had evidence of this, the consequences would be. Even if Pei Qian put righteousness before family, he wouldn't disregard his own life, right? Are you worried about the fourth prince? Lu Zhe stopped in his tracks, then turned around and stared at Lin Suisui. His tone was unpleasant. Lin Suisui was still thinking about this matter. When she heard Lu Zhe's question, she looked up at him in confusion. What did you say? If this matter really blows up, the Pei family naturally will not be able to escape. However, wouldn't the fourth prince suffer the greatest loss? Are you in such a hurry because you're worried that the general who stabilizes the north will ruin his career? Lu Zhe took a step back and stared at Lin Suisui with a gloomy look that he usually didn't have. There was even a hint of anger and grievance. Lin Suisui blinked. Her first reaction was that something was wrong with her senses. However, soon after she understood what Lu Zhe meant, she couldn't care less about these details. She stared at him in shock and anger. What nonsense are you talking about? Why would I be worried about him? Should I be worried that his new wife in the capital wasn't considerate enough, or that he would have no choice but to take in a few more concubines for the sake of his future? I'm not crazy, stupid, or cheap. Why would I be worried about him? Chapter 59. Your pregnancy is a huge matter. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Chapter 59. Your pregnancy is a huge matter. Translator. Henyi Translations Editor. Henyi Translations, Lin Suisui seemed to have thought of something and blinked at Lu Zhe. Then, she pretended to sniff as she looked at him mischievously. What's that smell? It smells so sour. When she turned around, she saw that Lu Zhe had already turned around and walked away. She quickly chased after him. She waved at Lu Zhe, who was silent beside her, and asked, "Hey, last time, you said that it was a vinegar jar. Could this smell be a vinegar? See, you're so sharp-tongued." Lu Zhe was rendered speechless by Lin Suisui. He turned around and grabbed the little girl's slender waist. As she cried out in surprise, he carried her on his shoulder. "After going through so much trouble for the entire night, I'm tired even if you're not. If you're willing to waste time arguing here, why don't you go back and rest early? Put me down. Put me down quickly." Lin Suisui reached out and hit Lu Zhe's back. Her heart was beating wildly. Not only was she afraid of falling, but she was also worried that her heart would flutter, making her feel even more uneasy. The two of them argued and had a good sleep when they returned. Perhaps because of the unexpected incident last night, soldiers had informed the entire refugee camp early in the morning that they would be resting for the day. While groggy, Lin Suisui vaguely heard the commotion outside. Just as she was about to sit up to take a look, Lu Zhe reached out and gently pressed her back down. "It's fine. We're not traveling today. Sleep for a while longer." Hearing Lu Zhe's words, Lin Suisui felt relieved again. She snuggled into the warm blanket and fell asleep again. Lu Zhe reached out to tuck her in and got up to change the fire in the hand stove beside him. Then, he entered the ox cart and stuffed something into Lin Suisui's arms. Then, he turned around and left the ox cart to do the day's work. The weather became colder every day. Their resources were limited, so it was definitely unimaginable for ordinary refugees like them to have charcoal to warm themselves. However, this wasn't a problem for Lu Zhe. Every day, when they arrived at the camp and lit a bonfire, they could make some simple charcoal to warm up on the road. Lu Zhe had just lit the bonfire when he saw Qian He walking over slowly. "Mr. Pei requests to see you." Qian He lowered his eyes and cupped his hands politely. "Wait a moment." Lu Zhe put down the firewood in his hand and slowly stood up. Then, he turned around and walked towards Mrs. Luo, who had come out to check on the situation. "Please take care of her. She slept late last night and is still asleep now. I've cooked porridge and placed it by the bonfire to warm it. If my wife wakes up later, please arrange for her to drink it first." "All right, I understand. Don't worry." When Mrs. Luo heard Lu Zhe's request, she looked at him kindly and smiled. Lu Zhe cupped his hands and thanked her before turning around and leaving with Qian He. After Lu Zhe left, Mrs. He, who had been paying attention to the commotion, hurriedly took a few steps towards Mrs. Luo, who was planning to go back and pack her things. "Why do you think Mr. Pei asked Gu Erlang to go?" "How would I know? How can we guess what the higher-ups are up to? However, Gu Erlang is capable. I believe that Mr. Pei called him over because he has some errands to settle." Mrs. Luo looked back at Mrs. He and replied with a faint smile. However, these few words were enough to make Mrs. He widen her eyes in shock. "Really? Didn't Gu Erlang say that he was just a hunter? How can he have the ability to help them? By the way, Mr. Pei seems to have a powerful background. If he values Gu Erlang, won't he go from rags to riches? With Mr. Pei as a guarantor, Gu Erlang's future potential would definitely be limitless." No wonder the two women from the Du family tried getting close to him without caring about their dignity. It seemed that Gu Erlang was really popular. Even so, it's Gu Erlang's business. What has it got to do with us? Mrs. Luo packed up the folded clothes. Seeing how excited Mrs. He was, she was a little puzzled and amused. I have nothing to do with it, but aren't you on good terms with Gu Erlang's wife? It's said that when a person achieves greatness, everyone benefits, right? Mrs. He forced a smile and sat down beside Mrs. Luo. She couldn't help but feel excited. Gu Erlang was so capable. Don't think too much about it. Also, don't blame me for not reminding you. Those two girls from the Du family are not easy to get along with. You should stay away from them. As Mrs. Luo spoke, she stood up. She patted the wrinkles on her clothes and walked towards the ox cart where Lin Suisui and the others had settled. When Mrs. Luo went over, Lin Suisui happened to open the curtain of the ox cart and come out. When she saw Mrs. Luo, she quickly smiled at her and greeted her softly, "Mrs. Luo. Someone just came and invited your husband over to Mr. Pei's place. Your husband was afraid that you would be worried if you couldn't find him when you woke up, so he instructed me to come over and tell you." Mrs. Luo smiled as she reached out to help Lin Suisui up. Then, she continued, "I brought you hot water. Wash up first. Your husband told me that he made porridge and placed it by the bonfire to warm it. Remember to eat it after you wash up. Mr. Pei called my husband over." Lin Suisui was stunned. Mrs. Luo didn't know, but she had experienced what happened last night. Therefore, Pei Qian definitely didn't call Lu Zhe over just to chat. That's right. The person who came over is still Mr. Pei's most important subordinate. When he came over, he was very polite to Erlang. Nothing will happen. When Mrs. Luo saw that Lin Suisui had already washed up, she handed her the porridge bowl. Then, she walked over and sat down beside Lin Suisui. She said to Lin Suisui with a hint of teasing and concern, "It's a good thing that you two have a good relationship, but you can't let your husband always have his way. Men have always been lustful. If you get injured, you can still recover after recuperating at the base, but if you get pregnant at this time, it would be a big deal. Things are very unstable during the first few months of pregnancy, and the road is bumpy during the journey. How can you withstand it at such a young age?" Pfft! Lin Suisui was caught off guard and spat out a mouthful of porridge. Chapter 60. Turning Point. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 60. Turning Point. Translator. Henyi Translations Editor. Henyi Translations. Hey, take things easy. I've been there. There's no need to make such a fuss. As Mrs. Luo patted Lin Suisui's back to calm her down, she shook her head helplessly. I'm just being nosy. If you know medicine, you should know that pregnancies are dangerous. You're still young, and so is Erlang. It's safest to think about the child after you guys settle down at the base. This was already very sincere advice. Lin Suisui calmed herself down and looked up slightly. Just as she was about to explain, she heard Lu Zhe ask curiously, "What child?" Cough, 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 cough. Lin Suisui couldn't help but cough violently again. What's wrong? Lu Zhe frowned and bent down to help pat Lin Suisui's back. How old are you? You can even choke on porridge. I just mentioned it. Since you're back, I might as well remind you as well. Since she had already said it, Mrs. Luo didn't hide it anymore. She turned around and pulled Lu Zhe over to explain in detail, I mean, we've been drifting from place to place while enduring many hardships. As her husband, you should be more concerned for her. It's not suitable to have babies on this journey. Just like any kind elder, Mrs. Luo pulled Lu Zhe and explained everything in detail. Lin Suisui wanted to bury her head in her porridge when she heard Lu Zhe smile and agree. Don't worry, Mrs. Luo. I'll take note. What do you mean? After Mrs. Luo left with a satisfied smile, Lin Suisui looked up with a flushed face and sounded a little anxious. How could Lu Zhe respond to Mrs. Luo? Why don't I explain it to Mrs. Luo now? Lu Zhe naturally understood how awkward and embarrassed Lin Suisui felt. Seeing her like this, he couldn't help but want to tease her. No, no, no. Forget it. It'll only make things worse. Lin Suisui sighed and hurriedly reached out to grab Lu Zhe, who was about to leave. She paused before saying, by the way, why did Pei Qian call you over? It's nothing. Lu Zhe sat down next to Lin Suisui and took out a needle bag that Lin Suisui was very familiar with from his lapel. He handed it to her and said, this is the silver needle you left on that soldier yesterday. Now that he has recovered, I've brought this back for you. In addition, Mr. Pei also gave me 1,000 taels of silver and asked me to go over to receive this reward. Lu Zhe watched as Lin Suisui put away the needle bag before continuing, the sergeant might have to follow us in the future. What? Lin Suisui, who was packing, paused and turned to look at Lu Zhe in confusion. Why? His identity is special and he's injured. Pei Qian explained to the others that he was a refugee who had wandered away previously and returned to the camp. As for his injuries, he was unlucky to encounter wild wolves on the way. For convenience's sake, Pei Qian's subordinates will drive an ox cart over tomorrow and disguise themselves as his companions. However, they will say that they're from my hometown. They'll have to trouble you to take care of his injuries along the way. Lu Zhe explained to Lin Suisui. But those medical officers have seen him before. Lin Suisui recalled that when she was treating that sergeant in the tent, in addition to Qian He and Pei Qian's subordinates, 2 other medical officers had been called over to stand by. There are only 2 medical officers in the camp now. Lu Zhe glanced at Lin Suisui and said in an inaudible voice. Lin Suisui's hand trembled as she held the porridge bowl. If she had not quickly reacted, the porridge bowl would have shattered on the ground. But I don't have enough herbs on hand. Lin Suisui licked the corner of her lips and suppressed the panic in her heart. After a pause, she continued, if Mr. Pei wants to silence people, why not just forget it? It wasn't easy to shirk this matter. Anyway, didn't they say that there's another ox cart for them to rest in? I just need to go over from time to time to check on him. It's not a big deal. Yes, they escaped from the military camp and caused a huge commotion. Therefore, along the way north, we might bump into people who came to search for him. Therefore, if he continues to stay by Pei Qian's side as an injured soldier, his identity would be exposed almost immediately. I'm afraid no one here can bear the consequences. Lu Zhe said it implicitly, but Lin Suisui understood. Not only did they know the background of that soldier now, but the general who stabilizes the north probably knew as well. In order to prevent those evidence from spreading to the capital, he would definitely search for the whereabouts of these escaped soldiers at all costs. And their refugee camp was too conspicuous. Moreover, the person in charge was Pei Qian. Therefore, it was hard to guarantee that the people from the general's camp wouldn't come to visit. If they came, the identity of the soldier couldn't be hidden. In order to keep the secret, everyone in the refugee camp would probably be considered disposable people that could be wiped out at any time. But if that was the case, from what you're saying, Pei Qian wants to investigate this matter. Lin Suisui was really surprised this time. If he only wanted to protect the reputation of the Pei family, there was no need for Pei Qian to go through so much trouble to keep this soldier alive. He only needed to silence him like he did to the 2 medical officials. However, he chose to save this sergeant's life. It seems so. Regardless of whether he investigates or not, this soldier is finally in our hands. If you want him to live, it's better for us to think of a way. Lu Zhe had naturally thought about it before agreeing to this matter. He actually couldn't tell what Pei Qian's plan was. However, the fact that this soldier was alive was a good sign. That's true. Although the evidence has fallen into Pei Qian's hands now, as long as this soldier is around, there will be someone to tell the truth. When Lin Suisui heard Lu Zai's comforting words, she finally calmed down from her shock and nervousness. She wanted to pick up the porridge bowl at the side to wash it, but Lu Zai took it from her. The stream is too cold now. I'll wash it later.